Activity 2.4 Reading Mullins 2010 Chapter 4 Individual Differences page 161 to 62. Read from Diversity, Gender, and Organizations to the end of chapter. As you read this, think about the organization that you know and remember this when you reach chapter 3, where we introduce the issue of women and management. Number 1. Do you think that there are differences in the type of work the male and female employees do? Number 2. Thinking about an organization you know, are there differences between the sexes with regard to the members working at each level of the business? Number 3. How can approach of psychology help us to explain any differences? Think about the wider differences and changes in social relations. 2.3. The anthropology of organization. Anthropology is the study of cultures and societies throughout the world and shares many of the features of psychology. The discipline emerged in Western countries and was originally focused on non-Western cultures, especially tribes and isolated societies. Anthropologists develop different methods of research from the psychologists because they face different challenges by studying culture that were significantly different from their own. More recently, anthropologists have studied not only traditional but also industrial societies. Wright, 1994, on her book The Anthropology of Organizations, to draw together a number of anthropological studies that have been done in Western and non-Western organizations. In both the public and private sectors, this usually involved the anthropologist spending time within the organization to develop an understanding of the behavior patterns, social groupings, rituals, symbols, and language within the organization or within particular groups of employees. The detailed descriptive accounts made possible by this method and the collection of data over a significant time length can yield useful results for understanding problems with organizational efficiency and social relations within the organization. Furthermore, the issue of national culture can influence aspects of management, and this has become increasingly important as more organizations operate globally. We explore the contribution of anthropology later in chapter 6 and 7 of the subject guide. Activity 2.5. It is important to note that anthropological research is not without issues that need to be taken into account when evaluating their contribution. For example, Molly and Sankaran, 1995, studied research and developed department in Indian organization. They described their method as an organizational ethnography, which was also the title of their book. This is defined as a study of organizations that tries to understand the behavior of people within it from the members' point of view. 1995, page 9. Number 1. What types of problems do you think the researcher faced? Number 2. What benefits did the researcher have? Number 3. Can you think of any reason why the data collected could be of limited use? Activity 2.5. It is important to note that the anthropological research is not without issues that need to be taken into account when evaluating their contribution. For example, Molly and Sankaran, 1995, studied research and developed department in Indian organizations. They describe their method as an organizational ethnography, which was also the title of their books. This is defined as a study of organization that tries to understand the behavior of people with it from the members' point of view. 1995, page 9. Number 1. What types of problem do you think the researcher faced? 2. What benefits did the researcher have? Number 3. Can you think of any reason why the data collected could be limited use? Feedback. Studies of this kind assume that it is possible for a researcher to understand the world from the view of an employee. not easy even if the researcher comes from the same country. There are also practical limitations on the approach because employees may not welcome such an depth observation. Also, the time the study takes and the problem of analyzing the wealth of data that emerges, for instance, from hourly interviews, make it an expensive approach. Finally, the use of the conclusion may only extend to understanding internal or group culture but may not offer any practical solution for improvements. Point 4. The contribution of psychology. Psychology is concerned with the study of the human mind. Psychologists engage in scientific research to understand the nature of the human mind and how it works. The processes that are studied include those seen to be determined by the inner mechanism of the mind and include the processes of perception, memory, and learning. Individual differences are a major focus of psychological studies to try to identify what is normal and abnormal. Activity 2.6 Reading. Read the following section of your main K-text. Mullins, 2010, Chapter 4, Individual Differences, page 130 to 44. Personality and up to and including the section on ability, it is important to understand what personality is, what influences its development. Be aware of some of the dimensions of personality, especially those that are relevant to the management job. Do not spend too much time on the theories discussed in this reading. In this section about psychology, Mullins look at the theories of personality types in detail and also points to the significance of case psychologists such as Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Remember this when you consider the rules of the manager in Chapter 3. Also, the functional area of human resource management that is examined in Chapter 5 is relevant, as it is this area that is mostly responsible for the selection and training of staff. How would you explain what psychology has to offer business and management? Jot down a few words and then read on. The approach of psychology is most useful for issues that are determined by the processes of the mind. This include how individuals make decisions internally, their performance capabilities, how they can learn, and how they respond to changing conditions. When exploring individual differences in relation to organization, the personality is important. This refers to the characteristics or traits that together make a person unique and that are stable, so resulting in consistent patterns of behavior. Theories of how we develop personalities cite a range of possible sources. Same hereditary and so biologically gained in other social such as from interaction with family, other groups to which we belong, and culture. Why might a manager want to assess the personality of an employee? Some examples of how an employee's personality could be important are the likelihood that the employee will be suited to a particular type of job, how successful an employee would be, and management rule, the method of training that would be most effective, the way that they interact and work with other employees. The research method employed by psychology have helped business a great deal. They are used in several ways. First, psychological tests have been adapted to assess the personality and intelligence of potential employees or of for decision about promotion. Tests are also useful to assess the attitudes of employees and so to try to identify conflicts with group or organizational goal. They are also used by the marketing departments of organization to understand consumer attitudes for the purposes of promoting the product that will best satisfy the customer. Secondly, the experimental methods of psychology have been used to observe the effects of changes in the workplace such as in working condition or changes to the benefits received by employees. A good example of this was introduced in Chapter 1, that of the Hawthorne experiment. Chapter 3 of this guide will introduce how of the most important contribution that psychological approaches have made to the understanding of organizational behavior. This is the area of motivation. Psychologists have done many studies of what motivates employees to work or to work well. This is because motivation can be related to the internal decision-making process of an employee, and so the studies are interested in identifying the factors that influence whether an employee decides to work to the best of their ability or not. Example of these theories that we will consider include those put forward by Hertzberg, Maslow, and Broom. See Chapter 3. Remember to check that you follow up the notes in the guide by reading about this psychology in the Mullins reading, and also check your glossary is up to date. Psychological contracts. A more recent development as related to the motivation, but more specifically to the expectation of both the organization and the employee. The concept of the psychological contract is used to be described the unwritten agreement of what the organization and the employee will both give and receive. This approach of psychology is able to add an appreciation of the need to consider commitment, goodwill, understanding, respect, trust, and loyalty. Therefore, the complexity of employee relation can be understood, and this approach can also provide a means of trying to identify threats to contract and understanding the consequence if the contract is broken. Activity 2.7 Reading. Read the following section of your main K-Text Mullins 2010, Chapter 1, The Nature of Organizational Behavior. Page 14 to 18, the section on the psychological contract and its changing natures. See also Body 2008, Chapter 15, Motivation, page 489 to 92. As you read, think about the needs for organizational change, which is discussed in Chapter 4. How could an understanding of the psychological contract help to implement a change program? It may help to consider that the elements of the psychological contract that could be affected, and to think of the need to overcome resistance to change. Work groups. The final contribution of psychological approaches to be mentioned here is that made to our understanding of groups within organizations. Work groups are of interest to psychologists because they consist of a number of people who are psychologically aware of each other, who interact with each other, and who perceive themselves to be a group for a particular purpose. This is true whether the groups are formally recognized by the management, such as a production work team or department, or whether they are an informal group, such as can develop within an official work group. Informal groups are just as important to identify and study, because members of these can also be working towards their own goals can affect the behavior of others. As team working has become an important tool of management, this contribution of psychology is particularly important. The need for team working skills is often stressed in recruitment drives, and training often aims to develop and enhance these skills. Can you see the relationship between this and the need to understand personality types? Groups are made up of individuals, and so that interact of different personalities can have a significant impact on the success of group work. Therefore, psychological approaches are very interconnected, since they are all concerned with the workings of the employees and also the customers' mind. This results in a view of the organization that emphasizes the interaction and interdependencies of individual personality.